right on that note, I'm calling David Dayan. We'll see what he had to say about the answer in a second. David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, perfect. I can't see you for some reason.
I don't know why. What do I need to do here? Oh, turn on camera.
Boom.
Maybe that helps.
There it is.
There we
Perfect.
go.
Perfect.
All right.
Hold on 1 second. I'm going to turn off my camera. I mean, you can still see me, but I'm turning off my camera on my end so that, all right, perfect. David Dayan of the American Prospect is here, ladies and gentlemen. Longtime supporter of the show and everything I've ever said, right, David?
Absolutely.
Everything I've ever said
exactly
unquestioningly.
Right. What are you, Trump? What's with this loyalty test?
This is an ambush. Yeah, this is a loyalty pledge. David, I want to start off. I know that we're going to be talking about the big beautiful bill. I call it Big Booty Bill because his booty cheeks. But before we get to that, what are your thoughts about Zohran Mamdani? Because that's like currently the number one thing that everyone is talking about, and obviously for progressive media figures such as yourself, this was a fairly. This was a tremendous success, right? I feel like it definitely performed above my expectations for sure.
Well, he ran a great race. I happened to be in New York just before the election and watching the media there. Every single ad promoted that New York Times editorial that was essentially an anti-endorsement of Mamdani. Yeah. And, the fact not only that he beat the big money, that he beat the establishment entrenchment of an Andrew Cuomo, but that he beat the liberal Bible of the New York Times, and that was not a factor in the race, shows what polls have already shown, which is that Democrats are fed up with their leaders, that they want to see a new style of leadership. They want to see a leadership that promises something real. And they're willing to buck the establishment in order to get it. And that's, I think, what we saw. And now I think the task for Mamdani, presuming he wins the general election, which I think he will, is that he has to go out and deliver. Because the way that he's gained trust with the electorate is that he's promised to do some very specific things. And now he has to pull those off. And I think he's going to get a lot of help from Brad Lander, who, as I understand it, is going to become the first deputy mayor and help him with implementing these policies. And if they kind of figure out a way to not only campaign in a way that attracts massive support, particularly from the young, but also to actually deliver on his promises, then I think that's a great model for progressive governing.
Absolutely. And I think that's precisely what the mainstream outlets have been afraid of. And that is the reason. It's not necessarily the failure of a Zohran leadership, the failures of socialism. It's actually the successes of and I wouldn't even call, Zohran is a socialist, but I wouldn't call his platform a socialist one. I think it's very modest social democratic reforms that he's pushing for.
I mean, you know what's funny? If you go to Erie, Kansas, a little town in Kansas, population about 800 or 900, you'd find a public grocery store. If you go to Akron, Ohio, you'd find free bus service. If you go to North Dakota, you'd find a public bank and a ban on non-compete agreements, which was also part of his platform. You could go all over Red America and find Zohran Mamdani's agenda in place.
No, absolutely. And they're treating it as though he wants to kill all the billionaires and push him into the water and seize all of their assets by force. There's also the idea that there is going to be capital flight from New York, which has never happened and it will not happen. This notion that there is tremendous capital flight whenever there's a little bit of social democratic reforms or or somewhat of an increase in taxes is also a silly one, especially considering how broadly popular this policy has been. The millionaire's tax has been in Massachusetts, right? Like this is a tremendously...
In California.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a millionaire's tax here too that was put in place by the voters in 2010. Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly there are going to be efforts to try to make him fail. Many of those may be coming from the police department rather than the billionaires. But I think the media is going to take a shot at this. We ran a piece on Friday from someone who worked in the office of Bill de Blasio. Now, de Blasio gets a bit of a bad rap, but he did put universal pre-K in place in New York City, and he did some other pretty popular things. But he got completely blindsided by the police department, and he really got hit hard by the media. And those, the piece that we ran was talking about those pitfalls and the things that Mamdani has to look out for.
Absolutely. That is going to be a major issue. I mean, I remember when the Sergeant Benevolence Association was tweeting about basically doing a death threat to Bill de Blasio at the time, and even ended up doxing his trans child. Like literally,
there was a claim that he turned his back on the police department in some funeral or something. I forget exactly what the setting was, but that was this. Basically, it was just an excuse for the Police Benevolence Association to just turn their back figuratively on de Blasio, and that became, a real big controversy in his first term.
Do you think that getting the backing of like attorneys general could potentially help at least like create a line of defense for someone like Zoran in this process? This is something that I've been thinking quite a bit about, and I feel like there have been a wave of some successful progressive prosecutors that are progressive DAs, for example, like Larry Krasner is the obvious perfect example of this, and then some unsuccessful ones as a consequence of immense pressure before they could actually implement any of these like progressive policies. But that has kind of like kept the city in check. Larry Krasner being the great example of this, because like murder rates have gone down, and there was a lot of pressure to even pressure to undemocratically unseat him. As a matter of fact, he withstood these attacks, and now it is seen as it can be held up as a tremendous success. Do you feel like a similar thing could happen as well in New York City?
I mean, potentially. I don't know if it's necessarily just Tish James's support, but the support of Lander and the support of Jerry Nadler and some other, sort of communicators that can just sort of offer testimony for Mamdani. I think really the fact that he essentially created his own media in this campaign, that he went around that filter and was able, through more perfect union kind of videos and through relentless attempts to engage the public, really allowed people to get his views directly rather than having to get them filtered through the New York Post or the New York Times. So I think that's going to be a real help to him, and something he's going to have to continue to do during his time should he win the office, because it's just too important. What we've learned now in the Trump era is that communicating in government is just as important as delivering. I mean, you not only have to act on your promises, but you have to let people know and make sure they know that those promises were kept and this is the benefit that you're getting. So he's set up well to do that in terms of his media architecture, and I hope that he continues.
Yeah, I hope so as well. The Morena method is what they're calling it. The same thing that AMLO did, the same thing that Claudia Sheinbaum is also continuing, is not only do you have good policies, but you also have basically created your own funnel, your own faucet of information that people can get directly from you, without any sort of like dilution from the message. And it's something that we've seen quite a bit, even in the past couple of days. Like after this unprecedented victory, it does seem like a lot of even mainstream liberal adjacent outlets are seemingly more predisposed with attacking Zoran, talking about anti-Semitism, sometimes viciously smearing him, as Kirsten Gillibrand did, saying he wants to implement a global jihad on Jews.
Right.
Or Eric Swalwell saying he doesn't agree with Zoran Mamdani's statements on Jews, which Zoran Mamdani has never said
Don't
a
exist.
single anti-Semitic
Yeah.
thing at all.
Yeah.
And just like this implication that he is somehow anti-Semitic, which I think is just racist, if I'm being honest. Maybe I'm a little biased, 33-year-old socialist Muslim political commentator myself, but
Right.
it is there is
It's hard not to
definitely
come
a
to that
racial
conclusion, though. As a older than 33-year-old Jew, it's hard to not come to that conclusion. It's definitely been really disgusting. And the other thing that's amazing about it is, and maybe this is a segue to what we're going to talk about, but we have this bill on the floor that is
Yes.
going to, cut taxes for billionaires and take food and medical assistance away from the most vulnerable people on earth. And we have to pivot and talk only about the material concerns of Americans, the Hakeem Jeffries of the world and people like that, instead of pivoting in that conversation and saying, look, I think I want to talk about the Republicans and the fact that they're taking away all these benefits from people. They have spent this critical moment, because the bill is going to pass. If it passes in the next few days,
Yeah.
they've spent this critical time smearing Zoran Mandabi for alleged acts of anti-Semitism. It's really incredible.
Yeah, especially at a time when like clearly positioning yourself against Israel immediately invites like anti-Semitism smears. And I think it's happening. It's always happened that way, obviously. But now the public is broadly aware of that as well. But the public also, especially within the Democratic Party's base, is insanely anti-Israel. You have, the 80% numbers now, like numbers previously unimaginable as far as like animosity towards what Israel is doing. And it's obviously well-deserved animosity towards Israel.
I mean, the funny thing is that Andrew Cuomo essentially made this a centerpiece of his campaign. He is the one that brought these things up in debates, in ads, and it failed among the electorate. So we don't have to guess how these attacks will go. They have fallen flat among the Democratic electorate in New York City. And that is a really important thing to internalize if you are a Democratic candidate who thinks they can get credit or get money for smearing people in this fashion.
Yeah, that's what's something that I noticed as well, was that I thought I didn't like speak on this too much at the time, but like I thought that their constant attacks on anti-Semitism, on like suspected anti-Semitism due to his like popular position on Israel, actually took up so much time and space away from other lines of attack that may have been more successful.
Right.
The usual bread and butter, like, oh, this guy wants to break the city, this guy wants to ruin the finances of New York. Or, I mean, who knows if that would have been successful as well, because it seems like Zoran had a tremendous door knocking operation, 50,000 campaign volunteers. Like this is, this is
and we were on the ground. We had people at the Prospect who walked around with canvassers, who were out at the polling locations that week, and you could feel the energy. And I agree that they had many choices for lines of attack. One of them being that Kathy Hochul, the government funding, and that's going to be a big fight for him. But the point is that instead of doing that, instead of saying that, they went down this road that the donor base really wanted, and it failed. And now they're trying. The funny thing was, the day after the election, there was this big meeting of the business elite in New York City. They said to discuss the Zoran situation. Did you see that? That was the name of it. So they've gone back from, oh, let's get behind Eric Adams, to, oh, Cuomo still has a ballot line, maybe we can get behind him, to maybe we'll find somebody else. I don't know who that would be, maybe Bill Ackman or somebody. They are just flailing right now in New York City because they know that this agenda is very popular. And the way that Mamdani took the way he waged the campaign, laser focused on affordability, on making New York a better place to live, is extremely popular.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get to the big beautiful bill, which I'll admit I haven't hyper focused on too much either. Passed in the House of Representatives, made its way to the Senate. There was a big will they won't they situation, even though it was obviously smoke and mirrors. Now it is going through a vote-a-rama.
Yeah.
As the Senate Republicans are trying to get the Trump tax cuts over the line, despite this party division, which I don't think is much of a party division. For those of you, for the chatters that might not know, could you explain what the process is for this bill to pass? Because it's a little bit unique, right? Because this is not a regular bill.
Yeah. So what we know is that when you're talking about the U.S. Senate, virtually everything legislatively that passes needs 60 votes. And the reason is that any senator can essentially call what is known as a filibuster. It really isn't that anymore because you don't go down to the Senate and talk your ear off. But they call it the filibuster. And the point is that in order to end debate on any bill in the Senate, you need 60 votes. And that makes it a problem for the majority party to get their agenda passed. However, there is sort of this one exception to that rule. And the exception is a process known as budget reconciliation. And it came out of the 1970s, and it was initially conceived to reduce the deficit. But now it's been used basically as, this is the one bill a year that we don't need to listen to the minority party, and we can pass this with a majority. And so as soon as Donald Trump got into power and the House and the Senate went by way of the Republicans, they started thinking about, okay, what can we do with this reconciliation process? And can we come up with a bill that can get all of the agenda? We'll stuff all of the agenda into one bill and then pass that. And that'll be our bill for the year, essentially, because we don't have to listen to Democrats. We don't need the votes of Democrats in order to pass it.
And the Democrats have used this technique as well.
Right. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 was a reconciliation bill. The American Rescue Plan of 2021 was a reconciliation bill. Obamacare, in part, was a reconciliation bill. At the very end, they used reconciliation to do some final tweaks to it. So, yes, it's used by both parties. And it's stupid. I mean, the fact is that we should get rid of the filibuster anyway. Elections should have consequences, and you should have a majority vote for your agenda. But instead, it gets rammed into this reconciliation process. And the rule behind this is that because it's a budget process, everything has to have a budgetary purpose. So you couldn't legalize abortion in a reconciliation bill. You couldn't change voting rights laws in a reconciliation bill. There are various other things that would be out of order in a reconciliation bill. But if it's budgetary, if it's taxes and spending, you can do it.
Well, there are limitations to what is considered.
That's right.
Yeah, and the
rule specifically says you have to have a primary budgetary purpose. Yeah. So if you're putting numbers to something, but it's really about a policy, that often gets thrown out.
Well, and then there's also other instances where, in my estimation, and I'm no big city lawyer, but it directly does impact the budget, but the Senate parliamentarian decides that it's not it should not be a part of the budget reconciliation, like the $15 minimum wage, which absolutely, I think, by by all estimations, would be considered having an impact on the budget.
It was a terrible decision. And that's when you get into this sort of metaphysics of what is a budget, piece of a bill, and what is not budgetary, and what has a primary budget purpose and what doesn't. And these things, as you alluded to, are taken up by the parliamentarian, who is an unelected clerk that works for the Senate, that is sort of the judge and jury of these various rules. What happens is one party files their reconciliation bill. The other party says, hey, I'm raising a point of order. That is not budgetary. And then they have a debate, and then the parliamentarian makes a ruling. And this has happened dozens of times throughout the course of this process. And many things have actually been kicked out. But, should our democracy be down to the sort of whim of an unelected bureaucrat within the Senate of deciding whether or not we're allowed to get a wage increase, or whether or not we're allowed to get this or that or the other?
And and I'm sure you can see the thing that I'm sharing with you, my screen right now. So in the past, and I talked about this quite extensively, the Senate parliamentarian has been fired and reappointed to reappointed on the basis of whether or not they would play ball with the agenda of the leadership. Dick Cheney did this. Yeah, Dick Cheney did this, exactly. But of course, Joe Biden didn't do this for the $15 minimum wage. And now that the Senate parliamentarian seemingly is cutting through a lot of this noise that the Republicans are trying to advance in this massive, massive wealth transfer, Donald Trump is saying, great Congressman Greg Stube is 100% correct. An unelected Senate staffer parliamentarian should not be allowed to hurt the Republicans' bill. Wants many fantastic things out. No, DJT, he says.
Now, it should be said the Senate hasn't listened to him on that. They have abided by the parliamentarians' rulings. But then what happens is you get into this bargaining process, this negotiating process. We're like, okay, you kick this out, but what if we tweak the language a little bit and do this? Is that okay? And then there's a back and forth, and then maybe the parliamentarian agrees with it. And that has happened on a few very key parts of this bill. And other things, the Senate has just said, okay, I guess we can't do that, and we'll throw it out. But on one very key part of this, the Senate has ignored the parliamentarian. And that has to do, and we're going to get just way too wonky right now, Hasan, I apologize. It's something called the current policy baseline. And it sounds stupid and not important, but it's why this bill is going. It's very important. Here's what it means. The Trump tax cuts for individuals expire in the end of this year. And one big thing that this bill does is extend the Trump tax cuts and makes them permanent. And the way it makes them permanent is it extends them for 10 years, and then there's an assumed permanence. So you would think, if you're a normal person, that would cost some money. It's not the law now, but if you make it the law for 10 years to pass the Trump tax cuts, that is a major tax cut from where it would otherwise be under current law, because otherwise it would go back to the Obama tax cut, the Obama tax levels, right? So the difference between the Obama tax levels and the Trump tax levels over 10 years is $3.8 trillion, right? Yeah. So what Senate Republicans have said is that, well, but this is just the current policy. We're under the Trump tax levels right now, so extending them doesn't cost any money because it's just the same policy extended through. And that is how they took a magic wand and made $3.8 trillion disappear. And so a bill that the Congressional Budget Office says will cost $3.3 trillion, according to Senate Republicans, they say it actually saves $500 billion.
Yeah, and this is the most consequential. This is the most consequential part of the bill anyway. This is the main thing.
That's right. And under budget reconciliation rules, if they were to count that Trump tax cut extension under a current law baseline, it would not be able. They would not be able to use this bill for budget reconciliation because it would be too expensive for a variety of different reasons that aren't very important. But the point is that using this gimmick, this current policy baseline gimmick, is the only way they can get this bill passed and make the Trump tax cuts permanent.
Yeah. Once again, proving the point that Republicans and no one really, maybe some Democrats, with the exception of some Democrats, no one actually cares about the deficit, especially when it comes to tax cuts for the wealthy. They actually don't care about the deficit at all.
And also, nobody cares about process. Like all the things I just told you about, you're not going to run a campaign on this.
Yeah.
Nobody cares. It's one side plays hardball when they have power to get done what they want to get done and work the rules to their advantage. And the other side says, oh, well, the parliamentarians said we can't raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I guess we can.
So by your estimation, especially as someone who wrote I would say the most comprehensive blueprint for what the Democrats should have done in the first 100 days of Joe Biden's administration, using pre-existing rules, as a matter of fact, a very pragmatic solution to implement
using
Biden's
pre-existing
agenda.
laws.
Yeah, using pre-existing laws.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this was a matter of Democrats not having the willingness to actually follow through on their agenda, on what they had promised in the campaign, more so than the counter narratives that they implemented, which was it's simply too hard?
I mean, they followed through on some of it. They certainly didn't do everything that we recommended or that I would have wanted them to do. Some of the things they were stymied by the courts, which is now playing this big game of Calvin ball, where if a Democrat does something, it's okay. It's not okay. But if a Republican does something, we got to get rid of these nationwide injunctions on Trump policies. So, we're up against it with the courts. We're up against it with some other things. But, could there have been more creativity under Biden to get done things that would have had tangible benefits for the American people and to get those benefits in place when he was in office? Absolutely. And I think that's one of the lessons that at least some people are learning about what to do should Democrats ever get into power again.
Yeah, I mean they are creating a robust infrastructure to implement a lot of policies, a lot of progressive policies that the people want, especially if you had like a broad popular mandate. If you were to run like a real populist campaign, we saw a smaller version of that with Zohran Mamdani. It seems like they would have all of the opportunity as long as they had the motivation to implement said agendas. Now that there are no nationwide injunctions and the lower court system is effectively powerless against it, what are they going to do? Launch class action lawsuits everywhere?
They're going to have
Medicare
to.
for all?
They're actually starting to launch class action lawsuits. But I want to say something on Medicare for all. Like, if you think about the creativity here, right? So what Republicans did is said, as long as something is in law, if we permanently extend it, it doesn't cost any money. And that helps us, be able to pass it. So in 2029, what if Democrats pass the Medicare for All for 1 Week Act?
Yeah.
Right? So it costs, whatever it costs to do Medicare for All for a week. And then they pass a reconciliation bill that says, Medicare for All is policy this week. So under a current policy baseline, we can make that permanent and it's free. That's the level of what Republicans are doing here. And as long as that's the rule now, that's the precedent that has been set. I don't see why you shouldn't just keep using it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's zero. It's not. It's already pre-existing law. We can make it permanent,
right? For free.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be fantastic. I don't think that there is enough interest, enough appetite in the Democratic Party. This would mean a dramatically different Democratic Party. But
here's can we talk about some of the things in the bill though?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Yeah, let's get into some of the meat and potatoes of this big booty bill that Donald Trump is trying to ram through. in a process not dissimilar to 2017 as well. Like very long, convoluted bill, major tax cuts, and
Here's the difference, though. The difference between 2017 and now. The 2017 tax bill, I believe it was called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act,
yeah,
did not have any spending cuts. They basically said, we're going to cut taxes and we're not going to pay for it. We're not going to do any social welfare cutbacks in that bill. But this bill has all the tax cuts. It also has all the populist tax cuts that Trump talked about on the campaign trail, like no tax on tips and no tax on overtime,
yeah,
and things like that. But it also has the largest cut to Medicaid in American history. It has the largest cut to food stamps in American history. It changes student loans to make them far more expensive than they are right now. So it really hinders your ability to get an education with a loan. And it rolls back all of the clean energy investments that were done under Biden to such a degree that we can expect much higher electricity rates and probably rolling blackouts because we won't be able to keep up with demand, especially with AI data centers and things like that.
yeah.
So, and on top of that, if that weren't all enough, there are massive increases to the budget of ICE in this bill that really haven't been talked about a lot. It's a 13 times the increase of the annual budget of ICE is in this bill.
Terrifying.
To do detentions and to do all kinds of policing. So if you, I know you're in LA, I'm in LA, I was down at the protest, so are you. If you want what's happening in LA right now with kidnappings on the streets of people basically racially profiled to be determined by masked gunmen who throw people into vans that they happen to be undocumented, whether they are or not. If you think that that was a good thing, it's coming to your town because they're going to have much more money to do that. And then even on top of that, there is another $150 billion increase for the military in this bill. This is a military that has $1 trillion budget, right?
Yeah.
Every year, like clockwork. And for all the arms that are going to other countries, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Israel, they get another $150 billion in this bill.
Is it true that this bill establishes ICE as the single largest internal policing entity in the United States? Like if
Yes.
implemented?
Not even close by a wide margin.
Yeah.
Scroll down. Look, there's an actual graph there.
Okay,
that's how much bigger.
David, this is Gestapo, right? Like they are unaccountable. There are already according like what the ACLU calls constitution-free zones that like Customs and Border Patrol and ICE is supposed to operate in without any sort of interest in receiving a warrant before doing search and seizure, in direct violation of the U.S. Constitution. And on top of that, it's not an accident that this administration is using the remigration or deportation or like immigration enforcement as a primary vehicle to push their agenda. And I don't think a lot of Americans understand this reality. They think it's just like a real problem, which wasn't a real problem at all. The idea that like immigrants constitute a national security threat, that's bullshit. It's completely made up. And the Democrats actually went along with that at a time when they should have been counter messaging against that every single day under the Biden administration. And now this not real problem requires a very real solution to it. And basically they're using they're violating the First Amendment, for example, with the unlawful detention and kidnapping of Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Mahdawi and numerous others. They're basically using it as a catch-all solution.
I'm on with you, but there's a press conference happening right now that you had agreed to leave the country. And she said, no, I haven't agreed to that. Then the same unmarked van and masked officials took her to a warehouse of unknown location somewhere in Southern California. She believes that these people are not ICE, but they are bounty hunters who have been trying to capture people and take them to the border in an attempt to be sort of a secret paramilitary force that is doing the bidding of ICE. I mean, the kinds of things that you're hearing about, the kinds of things that I've talked to people about, people who have been abducted from car washes and Home Depots all over Southern California. It's absolutely chilling, and it's reminiscent of South American countries under military juntas.
Yeah. No, this is like Argentina, like disappearances. This is
100%.
Chile. We are implementing shock doctrine to ourselves. And I mean, we already did a version of this in a more limited capacity post 9/11, which is
Right.
ironic because
Sure.
it is the one function of the DHS that we are now completely using to its maximalist needs. And
Right.
and it is very clear that they are using this as an opportunity, like the remigration or the denaturalization process, which will probably also come down the line as the DOJ has announced its plans to prioritize cases to revoke citizenship now.
Yes.
This is exactly the same method that the Nazis used. A lot of people don't understand the historical relevance of basically revoking the citizenship of certain individuals. The very fact that we've kept immigrants in this limbo where without processing them adequately while keeping them in constant check with ICE year over year, because like those are the people that they're going after right now, people that ICE knows exactly where they live, exactly where they work, the people that are authorized to work on U.S. soil, because without the complete documentation and naturalization, that already was inhumane in and of itself, and now we're using that as an opportunity to make a political statement. This administration is using the people that are playing ball with the existing legal systems in an effort to contribute to American society, to contribute to commerce. We're using them as pawns in this. It's a very violent game that we're playing.
And all of these things would be bolstered 10 times, 15 times if this bill passes. And, there's a lot going on right now, from protests to the situation happening with Iran, and obviously the ongoing terror and carnage in Gaza. And, and even Zohran Mamdani's great win. But this bill, I'm sort of making the pitch for people to get involved and understand that this bill would do just massive harm, because we talk about ICE, and obviously that's terrible, and we talk about the tax cuts, which would expand inequality even more. The Medicaid cuts in this bill would probably lead to the closure of hundreds of hospitals across the United
in
States,
rural areas, in
mostly
areas that
in
are already
rural areas.
underserved.
But just to be clear, when you close a hospital in a rural area, it affects all the other hospitals around there, because that's where those patients are going to go. And you're going to increase crowding, and you're going to strain the finances, because a lot of that care is going to be uncompensated. The projection is that 12 million people will lose Medicaid coverage as a result of this bill. Most of those people are very poor and have no other option in terms of medical coverage. They can't buy insurance on the open market. They don't have the money. So you're going to get much more uncompensated care, and that's going to strain more hospitals who will not be able to afford that. And this is I've been told that this is like a hospital apocalypse that you're going to see. And that's just that part of it. Then you go to the food stamp part and cutting the budget of food stamps. And a lot of the ways that these cuts are done is through adding paperwork requirements to people who want to sign up. So there's this thing called work requirements, and that's in Medicaid and also in the food stamp part, the SNAP part, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. It's basically a way to trip people up with paperwork. A lot of the people on Medicaid and on SNAP are working, but there will be consistent and insistent ways of saying, hey, you didn't fill the form in that you were supposed to every 6 months, and so now we're going to kick you off the program. It's just a way to trip people up with bureaucracy. And if you do that with the SNAP program, you're going to see food banks absolutely inundated, because where are people going to go if they don't get their benefits from the government? They're going to go to food pantries, they're going to go to food banks. And this could be the collapse of the food bank system in the United States, which is sadly enough very important to keeping people fed in this country. So you just go down the line with this bill, and you're essentially taking food and medicine and all sorts of other things away from the most vulnerable people in order to give billionaires tax cuts and to give the private and public Gestapo of this country the ability to wage more terror throughout the population.
Yeah. One of the classic things that they do, as you mentioned, is jamming people up with paperwork. Obviously, we saw a version of this in Florida during COVID, where they had like the websites purposely designed to break when there was when there were too many people that were applying. Yeah, that was for unemployment. Exactly.
Yeah.
And like they designed these things in a way where it's supposed to break so that people don't have access to these life-saving funds. And
they actually did briefly work requirements for Medicaid in Arkansas, and this was in 2018 and 2019. Sorry about that. And what happened was, you can look at the statistics back. I believe there was a court case that blocked this for a while. So we only have this history of 2018 and 2019 with Arkansas and work requirements. And what we see is that hundreds of thousands of people in Arkansas lost coverage, and it did not increase work in any meaningful way at all.
Yeah.
So this is not about work.
Didn't they also do voluntary work too? Because they couldn't figure out, like, there was another provision where it was like you could do like charity service or something as well.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, and it just like failed. It was a completely failed initiative where
there it is.
Yeah, the Medicaid work reporting requirements was a failure of a model, and seemingly we've
now we're going to export it to the whole country.
Yeah, we've nationalized it now, which is incredible, so that rich people can get a fucking tax cut. It's a massive wealth transfer. Going back to the communication strategy here, though, the Democratic Party unfortunately has a crisis in communicators when some of the more prominent figures are Cory Booker, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer. These are unimaginably unimpressive individuals, devoid of all charisma. I think Cory Booker could have been a charismatic individual. I think like when he was more so like a state figure, there was an opportunity there. But very clearly, he's become this like establishment Democrat lackey, and seemingly,
I mean, from on a charisma scale, he's probably one of the good ones.
Yeah,
exactly. About the Democratic Party, relatively speaking.
Exactly, which is why they hail him as this like champion of social media internally, which is hilarious. But but like, shouldn't this be the primary focus of the Democrats right now? Like,
100%.
Immediately defending Zoran as a future of the party and the direction that the party should be going to, and also simultaneously using every waking moment to talk about how unimaginably cruel this tax proposal is.
It is. It is that moment, but because of our fractured media system and because of what you just outlined in terms of Democrats' inability to seize the narrative, we have a situation. I just saw a poll that showed they asked people if they've heard of the One Big Beautiful Bill, and only 48% did. And they asked people if they knew about the Medicaid cuts, and only about 8% did.
Yeah.
And so this is the problem. It's a messaging problem. When a wonky thing is happening in Congress with budget reconciliation and vote-a-rama and just all of these terms that nobody has ever heard of or knows about, it's hard to get people super fired up. But this is going to have an impact on every American. And it's not a done deal. That's one thing that's important here. So the Senate is doing amendments right now. They're going to get to the end of that process probably late tonight or early tomorrow. And, we'll see, because there are still some votes up in the air. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, but past experience shows those guys are going to cave and they're going to vote for the bill, right? However, when this goes back to the House, because the House version and the Senate version are different, the House gets another crack at it. There is more deficit spending in the Senate version. There are deeper Medicaid cuts in the Senate version, and both of those are negatively seen by different constituencies among House Republicans. The Freedom Caucus sees this as more red ink, as more deficits, and they're very much opposed to that.
Oh,
the
thank God.
moderates, the handful
thank God
of
for
moderates,
the Tea Party once again.
Thank God for the Tea Party. Yeah. The handful of moderates in the Republican caucus see those Medicaid cuts as absolutely devastating. And a couple of them, enough of them to make it interesting, have said they're not going to vote for the bill. So there is still a possibility that the House doesn't end up passing this, or maybe they change it and then they ping pong it back to the Senate. And we keep going back and forth for a while. And the reason they want to pass this quickly is because they're happy that only half the public knows what's in it.
Yeah.
They don't want more people to know what's going on with this bill. They want to get this done at lightning speed so that it doesn't collapse under its own weight. And so that's why it's so important to get the word out here.
Yeah, we have a tremendously effective method of undermining the priorities of a bill that is supposed to be overwhelmingly popular, that got jammed up in Congress and was endlessly lied about. That is the ACA, Obamacare.
Right.
And the longer that process takes, the worse it gets for the administration to defend it, because more people catch wind of it. However, that only happens if the opposition party is willing and able to stand 10 toes down and talk about all of the tremendously unpopular parts of this this bill. And
I think it's able more than willing. I mean, Democrats have been talking about this, and for those who have heard about this bill, they hate it.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of the more unpopular bills in American history. For those who have heard about it, we just need more people to hear about it. And I think there's an inability on the part of the Democrats to have a messaging system that reaches most people. This is the problem.
Yeah, they don't. Well, yes and no. I do truly think that it's not just about like the lack of platforms. But it is also the lack of interest from the Democrats in like communicating how devastating this is. Because like,
I mean, one thing I'll say in their, I don't want to be defending Democrats right now, but one thing I'll say is that they could have taken on this bill in a different way. They could have talked about it as increasing the deficit, like who gives a shit. They really are talking about it saying this cuts Medicaid and food stamps so that it can give money to billionaires. Like they have gotten that down. And when people hear that, they're against it. So then you ask, are they being insistent enough? Are they talking about it enough? Are they not preempting their own messages by smearing Zohran Mamdani? There are definitely things they could be doing a hell of a lot better. But it is interesting that their core message is a little more populist than normal.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on. Before I let you go, I do have some questions about, and I don't know if you're interested in talking about this, but I do have some questions about the Supreme Court decision. Do you want to let your thoughts be known on that? As you know, the Supreme Court came down with a couple decisions. We briefly alluded to one. Obviously, there's the coalition of like religious families that are functionally bricking the core curriculum by saying that if there's any sort of like gay, if there's any sort of like queer character or anything in the core curriculum, then like you can't have that. But other than that, there's a Supreme Court decision that came down that made it so that lower court injunctions are no longer capable of stopping federal level decisions like national decisions that are done through executive order. It's significant because the court case that this decision came down on was a blatantly unconstitutional executive order that ended birthright citizenship. The Supreme Court didn't touch birthright citizenship, of course, in their decision, but simply said that the lower courts no longer have the power to do injunctions that stop national issues, something that the Republicans have used extensively under the Biden administration. Do you want to give us a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So functionally, what this means is that in the next 30 days, the Trump administration is going to implement some policies to end birthright citizenship. That at their discretion, they can say that someone who is born not to two native-born parents or something, some criteria, is not a citizen. And the real problem here, and we're going to have a story about this tomorrow, because it's fascinating. How are they going to do this? So the way that it works now is every baby that is born gets a social security number. Every baby born in this country gets one at birth. It's called the enumeration at birth. And now with this order, it's not clear how one would get a social security number, whether they will stop the enumeration at birth program entirely, or whether there will be flags that will be put on this program. All of that is done out of the Social Security Administration. Now, what we know is that the Social Security Administration has been completely gutted, particularly their regional offices, which have lost staff in tremendous numbers. If you're going to have to go into a Social Security Administration office in order to get your child, your newborn child, a Social Security number, and you have to bring whatever documentation you have to bring, including maybe the birth certificates of the parents. I don't know what you would need to confirm that this is a legal child born in the United States and is a U.S. citizen. Think about, there are already huge backlogs at Social Security offices all over the country. Think about if you add every child born in the United States, and now you have to deal with that too there. It's going to be absolute chaos for the system. So that's the short-term version of this. The longer-term version is that, there could be some Democrats that would be out there saying, no nationwide injunctions, sounds good to me. Student debt relief was stopped through a nationwide injunction. The ban on non-compete agreements that I alluded to before, which Lena Khan and the Federal Trade Commission did, was stopped by a nationwide injunction. So, there are certainly Democratic things that you could say, oh, if you can't block those executive orders, maybe that's a good thing. However, there are other methods that it seems like plaintiffs can take to stop blatantly unconstitutional orders. And it's through class action lawsuits, like you mentioned that before. But the problem is they're slower and they're more deliberative, and you have to go through the entire court case to get the class certified and get a temporary injunction.
And what if what if the certification is not upheld by the Supreme Court as well? Because
that's right.
Yeah, there's that side of it too, where like I think Clarence Thomas wrote something about this. They did a whole
lot of mucking with class action certifications and made them much harder to get in the lower courts. So it's going to be a lot harder, and more important, I think, is that in the interim, whatever that unconstitutional or sketchy executive order policy is, it can be implemented in the short term, and there's no real way to stop it. And so, and we just talked about with birthright citizenship, the chaos that could cause. So I think that's the bigger problem here, is that now we're just going to have random unconstitutional things potentially that are just happening in the country, and you have to wait to see if they can be stopped in a timeline that could be months, if not years.
Yeah. And I mean, for people to understand, simply put, you can have a child born on U.S. soil right now in New Jersey, where I believe there is already like a defense against this launched in the state of New Jersey, that is a full-blown American against that. And then that child born on U.S. soil is effectively stateless. Like, this person will not have a state.
It's unbelievable. And you're right. Like, if there was a case in New Jersey that the circumstances of that case are narrowed to the state of New Jersey, then you have different standards for birthright citizenship in New Jersey or Texas or Wyoming or wherever else. So it's a very unworkable system, and it's kind of like welcome to the Trump era.
I mean, this is Dred Scott, right? I mean, this is exactly
Yeah.
because like one of the immediate problems that I can foresee is what happens when a child born in New Jersey to undocumented parents that is classified as an American citizen actually engages in interstate travel and goes through
Right.
a state where they are not considered a citizen. Does that mean that technically that the New Jersey law remains? Because obviously, in this,
Yeah. What controls in that
yeah,
case?
like
Yeah.
which one has a higher priority? And judging by the way that this administration is operated, it doesn't feel like they would abide by the New Jersey standard, and instead would nab people and declare them stateless and send them to a concentration camp.
And if you can't get nationwide injunctions, you'd have to find a willing plaintiff and a willing judge in every state in the country in order to get a uniform standard, at least in the interim, right?
Yeah.
Maybe this rises up to the Supreme Court in 3 years and you finally get an answer on it. But that's just not going to happen. Like, there aren't enough judges who would be willing maybe to stop these kinds of things. You just, you're in Mississippi and you get the wrong judge, you draw the wrong judge and they say no. What are you going to do? That's the end of it. So, yeah, you're going to create these pockets of the country that have this unclear representation for what a couple, one of whom or both of whom are undocumented and has a child, what that child, where his citizenship lies, his or her.
Yeah. No, we're balkanizing the United States, and
100%.
We're fortunate enough to be in the PNW coalition here, where as long as we lock down Colorado, I think we are the bridge between Canada and Mexico. At least,
all hail Governor Kamala, the president of liberal America.
Yeah, we're gonna have the land bridge between Canada and Mexico, and like join a new American Union. I think.
There you go.
North American Union. All right, well,
secession talk to wrap this. Thanks,
David. Thank you so much for coming on. This was wonderful. You are so knowledgeable and so insightful. Where can people find you?
You go to prospect.org. We're there every day. We're actually doing a pop-up newsletter on this bill. So you can sign up for the newsletter at prospect.org and you'll get all of our stories in your inbox about the big booty bill, the big beautiful bill every single day until it's done. Which could be this week, so you might not get many more, but we're going to be keeping on it. And I'm at the former Twitter at DDayan, DDAYEN.
Hell yeah! Thanks a lot, David.
All right, thanks, man.
Bye. That was David Dayan of Prospect. Fantastic conversation. One of my favorite guests of all time. Consistently, endlessly knowledgeable. I think I'm also getting a little bit better at interviewing guests, don't you think? I didn't see a lot of naysayers in the chat complaining about how long and convoluted my questions were. I'm doing this thing where I know the answer to the question, but instead of like blurting out all this information, I just let my guest explain it, Not a lot of naysayers in the chat on this one, so that's good.